I'll call the multi-dwelling ad hoc committee meeting to order. For roll call, Bob Langham. Here. Michael Bandro. Here. Steve Bining.
Present.
Jim Strandland. Here. Laura Rusk. Sarah Delaney. Ron Kinsley. Here. James Bassett. Yes. Benjamin Kurzweil. Here. Tom Housel. Dale Olson. Bon Sutton. Pete Baraboo. We have a quorum. Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please note that this meeting has met the certification of compliance with open meeting law and was published to the news media. Meeting agenda has been posted with no additional changes. Just as a reminder to those that maybe haven't been in this room before, but all these meetings are run virtually as well via the Zoom platform. What's nice about that platform is that it's a recording of the meeting as well. So you do have to use your mic if you are going to be speaking, so we can pick it up and have that accurate record for the minutes without background noise as well. At this time, we will have any additional public comments from those that are not part of the actual committee. Are there any public comments wish to be made at this time? Go ahead, Linda Zilmer. You have 3 minutes, and please state your name for the record.
Linda Zilmer, resident of the Village of Birchwood, Edgewater property owner, and have been following town zoning now for over 20 years. For those of you who might be new to this and who did not attend, I believe it was the July Wisconsin Towns Association Sawyer County Unit meeting in Sand Lake. I think part of getting you all together stemmed also from towns having ongoing concerns and wanting better coordination and cooperation between county zoning and town zoning. And I don't see that as part of the resolution authorizing this, but I do want to point out that there are still some issues that need to be worked out, and I'll make further public comment tomorrow at zoning. January being a really good example of when the notices hit the paper versus when information was available for the public to see in coordination with Town Plan Commission and town board meetings. I would like to ask, once the committee gets going, if they would consider for future agendas to include a public comment period at the beginning for people who would like to say something on whatever you'll be speaking to, and then also to make public comment at the end of the meeting, maybe in reaction to what's discussed at the committee level here. I think part of the reason this has dragged on so long is that the previous attempts at zoning ordinance amendments have been very closed processes, and things have not been really vetted before they've gone out to the towns. Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to make public comments at this time? Anyone online wishing to make public comments at this time? Seeing none, with no one else raising their hand, I'll move on to introductions. Some of you may know each other here, some of you may not. I will kick it off. I'm Jay Kozlowski, Sawyer County Zoning Administrator. I've been zoning administrator now for the better half of 4 years. I've worked in the zoning department for over 15 years. And yeah, I was kind of the spearheader of wanting to get this ad hoc committee together. As we'll walk through the later portion in the agenda, some of the identified issues where I see a direct conflict in the ordinance and things need to be changed one way or the other. I'm not here to push you into which way that change should be made, but right now there's a direct conflict that I see that prohibits myself from properly administrating the code or the ordinance. So that's kind of the main purpose and the intent of this committee. I'm sure there'll be some other things that'll spur from it. With that, though, I will kind of pass it on to my right hand with Kathy.
Hi, my name is Kathy Marks. I am the Deputy Zoning Administrator. Apparently, I am Jay's right hand. Anyways, arm, that's okay, which is great. I've been worked in land records for 3 years, and then I moved over to zoning and did permits, and then got put into the position of Deputy zoning administrator for doing public hearings and everything. So you need anything, please contact me. I can help you out. Thank you.
Laura Rusk, Chair for Town of Hunter for the last, 13 years, I guess. 12 or 13 years, and I also serve on the Board of Appeals for Sawyer County. That's it.
I'm Bon Sutton. I've been the chairman of the planning committee for about 4 years for Bass Lake. I've been on the committee for about 6 years.
Dale Wilson, Chairman of the Town of Meteor for 24, 6, something like that years. And former zoning administrator for Town of Spider Lake, Sawyer County, former conservationist, lots of formers.
Andy Alvarado, County Administrator, not on the committee here in an administrative role.
Sarah Delaney, I'm supervisor in the town of Spider Lake and I chair the plan commission there.
Jim Stradland, I am a current Town of Round Lake supervisor.
Mike Bando, Town of Lenroot Supervisor.
Bob Langham, Chairman, Town of Sand Lake, 50 years.
Benjamin Kurtzwell, I'm currently the chairman for the town of Hayward. I was appointed back in May, so it's been about 7 months. I was also briefly a member of the town of Hayward Planning Committee, or Planning Commission, and for the last 21 years, I have been a property tax assessor, serving 7 towns in Sawyer County and 2 in Bayfield. So I've had some experience with zoning issues also in the past. So thank you.
Town board of Coudray. I've been there over 25 years. I don't know. Good enough. Thank you.
My name is Ron Buckles. I am committee chair for Sawyer County zoning. I'm also a board supervisor and I'm also town chairman for the town of Meadowbrook.
Ron Kinsley, Town of Radisson. Thank you.
Go ahead, Steve. Don't want to forget about you as well online there. Steve Beining, did you want to make an introduction as well? There you go.
Hold on. Trying to get off mute here. It was spinning on me. Steve Beining, Town of Draper Supervisor and Chair of the Draper Plan Commission. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and with that, then we'll roll into election of officers. We're going to have our county administrator run elections. We do need to basically vote on a chair and vice chair position of this committee.
Yep, we'll do the chair position first. There'll be after nominations, we'll do a voice vote. I'll open the floor for chairs for position of chair of the Multi-Dwelling Development Ad Hoc Committee.
I nominate Dale Olson for chair.
I second that motion.
So we have a nomination. Are there any other nominations for chair of the ad hoc committee? Final call, any nominations for chair of the ad hoc committee? With no other nominations, I suggest or somebody to make a motion to close nominations and cast unanimous consent for Dale Olson as chair.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second, sure.
Mr. Bassett seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Congratulations, Dale. Shoot, I'll do the vice chair unless you want to. Nope. All right. I'll open the floor for nominations for vice chair of the ad hoc committee on multi-dwelling development.
I would like to nominate Ben Kurzweil.
Motion in a second. Any additional nominations for position of vice chair for the ad hoc committee? Final call for nominations for vice chair of the ad hoc committee.
Did anybody second it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Dale did.
There are no other nominations. I again can't suggest a motion to close nominations and cast a unanimous ballot for Ben Kurtzwell. Dale first. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Langham seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations. It's all yours.
I got one other before you take over there, Dale. Per our county supervisor, rules of ad hoc formation, when approved by the county clerk, the committee may appoint a recording secretary. The county clerk has approved that the committee can nominate a secretary. I would make a recommendation that you would designate Kathy Marks as the secretary for this committee. I would need a motion and a second on that.
What was your title?
Secretary.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Mr. Bassett, seconded by Mr. Kurtzwell. All in favor of Kathy Marks as recording secretary, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Congratulations, right hand, Kathy.
Thank you.
Identified issue presentation.
All right. So I would assume most of you are familiar with multi-dwelling development. Obviously, you know the history of, some of the ordinance amendments that, we were proposing last year. And obviously those weren't, I guess, good enough to the liking. And that's why, again, I've asked you guys here to help craft what we want Sawyer County to look like for the future. So the definitions in the zoning ordinance is where some of the initial conflicts come from. So I believe you all have a handout, so you don't have to kind of squint at the TV there. But the definition of a dwelling unit as defined within the current Sawyer County zoning ordinance, a building or portion thereof where rooms are arranged, designed, used, or intended to be used for one family. They don't, guest houses with kitchens and bathroom facilities and any accessory structures with habitable living area are considered to be dwelling units. Houseboats and watercrafts on land shall not be used as dwellings or dwelling units. And then it says only one dwelling unit is allowed per lot. That highlighted portion there is important when we look at other sections of the ordinance moving forward. So then we have the definition of a lot, and a lot is that it's capable or being occupied by one building or one dwelling unit and other accessory buildings that are customary incidental to those uses. Then we start looking at what multi-dwelling development is and where multi-dwelling development shows up in the later portion of the ordinance. Multi-dwelling development currently defined as development regardless of the form of ownership consisting of 3 or more dwelling units, condominium, a resort, a hotel or motel, or other units or structures intended for residential or long-term or short-term rental, all which is to be located on the same lot. So right then and there, before I even go any further, multi-dwelling development lists a resort, a hotel, or a motel. But yet, when you have a hotel or a motel, you're going to have multiple units as part of that, where per the definition of lot and the definition of dwelling unit, you're only allowed one per lot. So if the definition of dwelling unit and lot only allows for one, how can you even create a resort, a hotel, a motel, an apartment complex, anything of that scale or character when you keep those same definitions? And that's my biggest conflict. If you don't want to have hotels or motels or apartment complexes or resorts, that's fine. And that's what this committee is being, tasked to come up with those. But if you do want to have those potentials to have those types of developments, some of this language needs to change or else it just sits there and conflicts with itself. We will talk a little bit about resorts as we move forward. I don't want to get too in depth with resorts as part of some of the initial meetings, but as we move forward with some later ones, we do want to start talking about the resort definitions. So I'm going to kind of just skim over that one for now because that one could be an entire hour-and-a-half meeting itself. So we go to the next page then. This is under the zone districts. And when we look at the zone districts that are located within the current zoning ordinance, this is where we start seeing the actual language for multi-dwelling development, where through a conditional use permit, you can do this multi-dwelling development. But again, when you revert back to the definitions, you only allowed one dwelling unit per lot. Well, you wouldn't want to have those listed in a conditional use permit clause if you didn't want to have some type of avenue for someone to apply and be able to do this type of development in the first place. So within the R1 district, which is the residential one zone district, uses authorized by conditional use, we have a definition for multifamily, not multi-dwelling, but multifamily, which consists of 3 or more dwelling units. There is no definition for multifamily, and there is no definition for one of the permitted uses, which is for a 2-family dwelling. It has always been, I guess, assumed that a 2-family dwelling was a duplex or a side-by-side. There's no definition in the current ordinance. So we do want to get a definition as for what is a 2-family dwelling. Because if there's no definition in there, again, assuming is not a good thing when it comes down to ordinance standards. Especially in today's age where people are really looking at the black and white of ordinance language, and any type of gray area gets put up to the court merit test pretty quickly and is usually thrown out because it's not black and white as part of the ordinance. So that same permitted use within R1 of that 2-family dwelling also shows within RR1, which is residential recreational 1, as well as in residential recreational 2. So those currently as our permitted uses for the 2-family dwellings, but again, no definition within the ordinance of what a 2-family dwelling unit is. RR1 and RR2 are very similar in what shows for uses authorized by conditional use. Again, that is where it states that you can do a multi-dwelling development, which is, i.e., a new condominium, hotel, motel, or resort, or other development which is in the same general scale and character, does not include the conversion of existing properties to a condominium ownership, existing resorts, motels, hotels, or other existing multi-dwelling development unless more rental or dwelling units are being proposed by plat or other means that would be in addition to the existing rental or dwelling units. Again, if it's listed as part of a use authorized by conditional use and you don't have a definition that allows for multi-dwelling development because you're only allowed 1 dwelling unit per lot, the ordinance sits there and conflicts. And that's really what I need help cleaning up, or at least being able to tell applicants that are wanting to apply for some of these types of uses as to what Sawyer County is going to have in the future for that. Go to the next page there. This is part of the current shoreland ordinance. Again, when we first started some of the draft language, we invited the town supervisors or representatives to come in. And one of the larger aspects that we were hearing from the towns is that, yes, we kind of want the avenue to have multi-dwelling and the potential to have these, duplexes or apartment complexes, but not necessarily within the shoreland district. We want to preserve our lakes, we want to conserve our shoreline, but in the same aspect, allow for, some of the housing crisis that we have in our area to look at off-water multi-dwelling development. Within the shoreland ordinance, it does still state that only 1 principal dwelling or habitable structure is allowed per legal lot. So if that is still the intention of this committee and the intentions of the towns, is that, yes, we can potentially, have this as non-shoreland development. I don't think we necessarily need to touch the shoreland ordinance because it does say in there still, only 1 principal dwelling or habitable structure is allowed per lot. So I just wanted to make that point. Then moving on, we go to, again, and I've already kind of stated this, but then to summarize some of the issues here. So again, the current ordinance, the current zoning ordinance allows for the creation of multi-dwelling development under conditional use permit. However, the definition section only allows for 1 dwelling unit per lot. This is where the conflict exists within the ordinance. Again, there is no definition of a 2-family dwelling. 2-family dwellings are commonly referred to as a duplex or a side-by-side, but they're not defined in ordinance. Also, there is no clear specified density requirements for this permitted use. Density requirements is something that we will definitely need to discuss if this is something that we want to move forward with the aspects of multi-dwelling development. Density boils down to how much land area or what configuration does that land need to be for each single dwelling unit. Example, you wanted to have a 4-unit apartment complex. You shouldn't be able to put that on a 5,000 square foot lot. You just don't have the density for that type of building on that lot. But that is something that we need to discuss is, if you want a duplex, do you need to just meet the minimum of 20,000 square feet, which is our minimum density requirements? Or if it's because it's 2 units as a duplex, should you have to double that amount? That's not clearly specified within the ordinance. And that is something that we should also be focusing on is density. And that would be at least my recommendation. If this committee wants to look at multi-dwelling, it's that each dwelling unit needs to meet those minimum density requirements. That's kind of what number 3 states. Density requirements in general need to be clearly specified in the ordinance. If Sawyer County was to allow for multi-dwelling development, it should specify a land area. Only the R1 district currently states in the ordinance that 5,000 square feet additional is needed for each unit. Now, we can certainly change that. You could go more, you could go less, but that is the only zone district that actually has some type of density established in the ordinance. Resort definitions with the aspects of tourist rooming house. That is something that we will want to discuss as well. Now, again, per the kind of scope of this committee, I would urge you not to get too focused on tourist rooming houses themselves, as that is as a separate health and human service license that was recently adopted. There are some conflicts with what the current definition of a resort is. But at this point, we've been told by legal counsel that the county cannot restrict the rental of 1 dwelling unit per lot. But we can certainly look at the definition and change it one way or another to kind of clarify that definition. So that's where we're starting to look at, if you're renting more than 1 dwelling per lot, that is something that I would need help and want this committee to focus on as well. Next page. If the definition of dwelling unit doesn't change, it effectively, if the way I interpreted the current zoning ordinance, if we don't change that definition of dwelling unit, it effectively prohibits any new resorts, hotels, motels, apartment complexes, and that the language clearly states only 1 dwelling unit is allowed per lot. My recommendation is if we did want to allow for, and I have some examples on the side, so, call it a 6-unit apartment complex, we should at least have additional language that unless it's otherwise approved by a conditional use permit. I don't think any of these multi-dwelling developments should be as permitted uses. There should still be a town approval process. There should still be a zoning committee approval process, really to get all the aspects out on the table. But that's where I would recommend that, if we did want to allow that, it should be that simple added language unless otherwise approved by conditional use. By totally outlawing multi-dwelling development or restricting it to other zone districts does create potential non-conforming uses. This is not an advised practice within zoning. Like I said earlier, initially towns did not want to see new multi-dwelling development within the shoreline district, and that is something that can be proposed. And again, those questions go back to, should a duplex be prohibited within the shoreline district? Should the shoreline district, for those that aren't aware, is 1,000 feet from a lake or 300 feet from a river or stream. So just keep in mind as to what's actually the shoreline district. It's not just waterfront. It's a zone that's 1,000 feet from a lake or 300 feet from a river or stream. Again, talking about, resorts and short-term rentals, the county does have a new TRH licensing ordinance. This allows for the rental of 1 dwelling unit on a lot. What is to be done with properties that were not at an existing resort status, existing multiple units on 1 lot? We have, I would say, well over 1,000 of those within the county where there are more than 1 existing dwelling on a lot. Whether they were old ma and pa cabins and those 2 cabins still remain on 1 lot. We're seeing a lot of individuals now that want to rent both of those units. Is there a mechanism to do that? Is it strictly prohibited? Are they only allowed to rent 1? again, questions for this committee to answer as part of your service. So, is there a process that someone needs to go through in order to do that? And those are kind of just my summary takeaways of where I see this committee hopefully focusing a majority of their efforts. I do have a couple kind of examples and some of the other diagrams there. This is not a hypothetical. This was actually proposed to me. This is the one with the 4 dots or the 4 green dots in the red box. This was proposed to me about a year ago and told the individual at this point there's no avenue to do it. They would have to create 4 separate lots, but their intent was to have kind of a common well that would share to all 4 units and a common drain field that all 4 units could service. As the current ordinance, this would not be allowed. They would actually have to chop that into 4 separate lots, which can be done. It can be done by a certified survey map process. But when you chop something into an individual lot, we now have to apply individual setbacks to each of those lot lines. And now these structures being able to share common well and sewer, they're pushed out a lot further because of the setback limitations with the property lines. And for this scenario, they weren't able to share those common facilities. So they ended up kind of just putting it on hold of what they wanted to do there.
Jay, could you go ahead and explain in this scenario why it was 330 feet between the units? I'm assuming whether it's 2 rear setbacks, it would be 75 and 75.
Yeah, I did have another slide on this earlier. I believe this was something that it was zoned forestry, and it was, yes, as something as a front lot and a back lot. So there was different setbacks applied to it. I'd have to circle back with you on that, Mr. Olson, as far as the 330. That does seem a little bit too far from what I'm thinking, but it certainly would be over 70 from each other.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question too real quick, please?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Kurtzwell.
Just a question for Jay. How many acres is this lot that's colored in red on this map in this scenario? How many acres total is that lot?
This was proposed to me over a year ago. I'd have to go back to my notes and actually see. I believe this was a forestry zoned lot where they were looking at potentially rezoning it. So, I mean, you could assume that that's a 10-acre parcel of land or a 5-acre parcel of land.
Somewhere in between 5 and 10 acres is it is a safe guess. Thank you very much.
And then just the last slide, again, kind of looking at a lot of those scenarios that we're seeing out there where we have 2 existing dwelling units on 1 lot. Those existing dwelling units were legal non-conforming, meaning that they were lawfully placed when constructed, but do not meet the current ordinance requirements. That occurs quite often throughout the county, and not specifically related to illegally built bonus rooms above garages. I know that is a contentious aspect via zoning. So we're not saying that, because you illegally built a bedroom area above your garage, now you can also rent that out. No, we're talking about specifically those ma and pa cabins that were built pre-zoning, pre-1968. What do we do with those moving forward? What do we do with those if they want to now rent those units? And again, there are certain aspects of this definitions that I definitely have some recommendations on. When it comes to stuff like this, I don't want to make recommendations. I would prefer if this committee was the one helping with the guidance of draft ordinance language. And that ultimately is kind of, what I have as identified issues. I'll kind of turn it back over to the chair to see if we want to do some roundtable Q&A discussion, talks amongst ourselves. But looking for feedback from what direction we go now.
Okay, thank you, Jay. So I think the purview of this committee has kind of been stated, but everybody should be on the same page. And when we talk about the intention of the committee, let's try to keep it to this multifamily development, not rewrite, but we'll call it a fix. And I know there's a lot of other issues that a lot of towns have, whether it's from the planning commissions or town boards. And we'll have to leave ambulance for the ambulance committee and radio towers for that committee of jurisdiction. So let's just try to keep it to the multi-dwelling. And I think in this scenario, the KISS principle of keeping it simple, stupid, kind of is the one that would make this far less onerous than some of the revisions we saw in the past that the towns voted on, which were 30 pages long, something on that order. They were long. I remember that. And I don't think anything that in-depth has to be done. So I think we can start just by show of hands for whoever has something that they would like to propose and talk about the intention of the committee and where you think we ought to look at. I'm a huge proponent of having a jumping off point when we meet because my time is valuable, as is every single one of yours. And if we have something to take off from where we've already kind of agreed and we can go that way, I think that will save us lots of time. I've seen way too many committees flounder in semantics. So with that, Mr. Bassett.
Okay, I've done, well, worrisome wondering, middle of the night when I should be sleeping. And I don't see any way of coming out in a good condition in this county, operating in the system that we have at this point in time. RR1 and RR2 is where the basic houses are. And we're basically roundabout talking about putting multiple dwellings on the same lot. And you know, we're talking apples and beef. I mean, it's so separate. I personally think we need a new zoning classification. How can you put rules on a multiple dwelling and put them and keep them yet within an R1 and an R2 classification? Baby, you ain't ever gonna make everybody in the county happy. I don't care how you do it. How do you define two separate terminologies, discussion of, well, not so much discussion, of different measurements for property lines, how big the septic system has to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and put it all under one zoning title? You need to make a new classification. Call it what it is, however you want to name it, I don't care. But it would be a classification for multiple dwellings. First year or two would be a little bit of a pain in the butt, I know, because you'd have to move over resorts and whatever. But at that point, you could come up with a set of rulings to fit that one zoning classification. And it wouldn't confuse it because it wouldn't be mixed in with the RR1, the RR2, 5 acres for agriculture, forestry. And you wouldn't get into the point where you started irritating the septic system gurus in the state of Wisconsin, where you're got a 100 by 200 foot lot. And people want to put an extra house on that lot with a septic system built for a family of 4. You know, you got to look at the future, and that's going to be, God only knows where septic systems are going to go in the future. But there's no sense in raising something that would probably get in trouble 15 years from now. My bottom line is, I don't see any way of doing this cleanly without making a new zone, a new zoning category.
Zone district.
Oh, okay, RR1, RR2, multiple dwelling forestry, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Mr. Kurtzbaum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess a couple things, and this is how I view what the goals of this ad hoc committee should be. First of all, is we need to clarify and or solidify some of the definitions of certain things, including, again, maybe a 2-family dwelling duplex, a resort we can revisit. I think the definition we have right now is working so far. Dwelling versus dwelling unit. I think that's part of it. And I think part of our goal here is to determine what we feel, how many dwellings or dwelling units are allowed on a shoreland zone lot on something with a lake frontage or river frontage. So that's what I think what most of the concerns are coming out of it. I agree with some of what Jim says. I really think this multi-dwelling development thing is kind of, and maybe I'm being a little naive, but I think it's kind of an easy on the face of it. My recommendation is that we delete or expunge that term multi-dwelling development from the ordinance completely. It already encompasses things that are already defined in the ordinance, like a resort, hotel, motel. By adding a multi-dwelling development term that encompasses other things, there is confusion. So a lot of these things are already defined under our current zoning ordinance. Now, in the situation here with this 5 to 10 acre parcel, looking to have 4 units of some type of a family compound, I believe there's something under the Sawyer County ordinance already called the planned unit development, which allows for something like this to happen. So it seems to me that, I mean, I understand there could be some clarity issues or question confusion, but by eliminating the term multi-dwelling development, it seems is going to help clear some of this stuff up, because all of these other things, hotel, motels, resort, they're already defined. We already have definitions. And again, that's my 2 cents on the multi-dwelling development. Obviously talking about 2 family dwelling definitions or the accessory dwelling units, and the TRH stuff is another thing, and density requirements, but that to me seems like it potentially be the easiest fix to this multi-dwelling development confusion and conundrum. So thank you.
Very good. Anybody else want to take a kick at the cat for right away?
Just some, I guess, follow-ups. If we were to look at a separate zone district or as a part of a PUD, back into this scenario where, let's say this lot, was 20 acres, next immediate neighbor was 1,000 feet away, would the towns be susceptible to someone rezoning into that zone class when it's going to be considered spot zoning, because there isn't going to be those zone classes elsewhere? I mean, are the towns going to be receptible for someone trying to do the right process and do things correctly? That would be my only fear, is that, someone's got this large chunk of land and they want to get into this separate zone district to do this type of use. Are the towns going to say, well, it's spot zoning and we didn't have it in our comp plan, and they're just going to kick it out?
Go ahead, Mr. Bassett.
Jay, it would be better that than having somebody come along under the existing ordinances with the sizes for with the smallest size possible for an RR1 or an RR2 district multiple dwelling. It would be far better to have confusion with some people trying to change whatever zone districting over to a multiple dwelling district. That would be way better than something that would really doesn't belong, doesn't fit, and could cause problems in the future because of the size. And you're kind of putting a horse before the cart there, or the cart before the horse, in worrying about what the townships would want. I think the townships, personally, I'm really not very excited about multiple dwellings. I think there's a lot of problems, but we have quite a few already. You got to make room, or you got to make a place to put them, because let's be really honest, they don't fit in any zoning area that we have, or zoning class that we have on the books right now. But by doing this, it would, I don't know, and that would have to be worked out in the end. But does it take a Board of Appeals decision how to change it over to do whatever with a multiple dwelling? Would just a conditional use meeting Or could we just take a look at that and there's enough acreage there to make, because you'll have, I'm assuming that in the future, if you were to do that, you would have sizes recommended for how many living units, et cetera, et cetera. You'd have all that laid down in there, and just having that there, someone could just open a book, read them, and know whether it would fit on a piece of property in question. I think it's not that big a deal. I don't think it's that big a problem. My opinion only, Jeff, and you know me, I'm very opinionated.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to have this as an open discussion if you don't mind. I mean, because the other aspect, you know, if you didn't want to restrict it to a special zone district, because you talked about the size, you could just make the density for the second one a lot larger. So the one dwelling unit right now in current ordinance requires 20,000 square feet. It's got to be 100 feet of width, 200 feet of depth. What if the second dwelling unit required an additional 40,000 square feet, which is almost an acre? Would that be something that we could steer towards versus a separate zone district and really kind of ping it as a density requirement that if you want this second one, you need almost another acre in order to put the second one out there? Just a thought. So
I'll jump in here. If you look at that 4 square that we looked at, the second to the last page in your packet that Kathy prepared. So when we talked about, Mr. Kurzweil broached this planned unit development, had it for many, many years, already in the county, already takes place. It's not part of the zoning ordinance. It's part of the subdivision ordinance for when the surveyors break down land and do all that kind of thing. So I'll just read from the subdivision ordinance when you look at planned unit development, it says, see cluster development. And cluster development is defined as a form of residential development at least 5 acres in size that concentrates buildings on lots or parts of the site to allow the remaining land to be used for common open space, recreation, and preservation of environmentally sensitive features. The concentration of lots is facilitated by a reduction in lot size. A cluster development will consist of 1 or more cluster groups surrounded by common open space. That seems to be exactly what they were looking for right here. I think the solution was in the subdivision ordinance, not in the zoning ordinance, which, you know, not everybody's going to want to jump on that, and people always balk at hiring surveyors to do things like that. But there's already a solution in place, as Mr. Kurzweil pointed out, for something just like this. I hate reinventing a new zone district for something that there's never going to be perfect round problems to fit in perfect round holes. We're going to have some squares eventually. It just has to happen. I can talk about one that both Kathy and Jay are familiar with on Sisebagama Lake. It was a property owner that wanted, he had 2 lots. One was given to him by his father, and he owned with his wife the second lot. And he wanted to build his house right on the lot line. Didn't want to put it to the left, didn't want to put it to the right on the lot line. That's fine, combine your lots. Okay, I'll do that. Okay, one's in your and your wife's name, one's just in your name. You're gonna have to change one of them. Either both of them are in your name or both of them in you and your wife's name. I'm not gonna do that. Well, you have to, that's your choice. If you don't want to do that, move your house left or right 50 feet. No, I don't want to do that either. So you're going to have people that are going to have these issues that, yeah, I don't want to do that. Well, in that case, those are both pretty reasonable requests. I don't even know if I remember what exactly happened in that case. Did he?
I think he ended up switching to a separate, or his wife's name.
Yeah. I think he did end up just changing the names and combining the lots and built where he wanted to build. But it took a lot of arm twisting to get him to do that. I said, it's a marital property state. Your wife gets half regardless of whether her name is on that lot or not. He understood that. I'm not sure what the issue was, but so these problems are going to arise. Mr. Kurzweil?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. One further question I maybe have for seeking clarification from Mr. Kozlowski is on the last slide. where it's, can this property request for a resort with the two pre-existing dwellings or dwelling units, existing dwellings that were lawfully placed at the time. Jay, I kind of thought you said too that we have to look at this, but then it's going to be a different situation if we have these accessory dwelling units that are apartments above garages. And to me, it's, I mean, how are we going to separate those two? If there are two places that were built in 1955 that are legally built in 55 and now they exist and someone wants to rent out both of them, how is that going to be treated differently than someone who built a house in 2003 or in 2000 and then illegally constructed that apartment above their garage, and after 10 years or whatever, it becomes a legally non-conforming structure? What's going to prevent, if we say this is a resort in a residential neighborhood, what's going to prevent then from someone else in a residential neighborhood saying, I have this accessory dwelling apartment over my garage and here's my house, I want to turn this into a resort and have it, operating, renting both. So that's my confusion there. If we have two, that's kind of my question with that.
Mr. Beining.
Hey, thanks, Dale. I guess two things. When I look at that second picture, actually the first one with the 4 units, I don't know how you're going to get financing on separate units there because our GSEs are purchasing roughly 90% of the mortgages. So unless some private bank is keeping all that paper on their books, which they don't, they're not going to get financing with shared well and septic unless it's probably a condo. So to me, that scenario was rightfully denied because when you have 4 families together, 5 years in, somebody's trying to sell one. Now you have a bigger problem. We're actually saving them a lot of problems by having that stuff separate. The financing arm of this world controls a lot of the levers in today's economy. And if you want to make non-conforming loans out of with non-conforming zoning pieces, you're just going to have more problems. I guess I concur with Ben with the multi-dwelling development. I Googled this term and the only place I saw it was Sawyer County. I see a lot on multifamily and when you put the hundreds of commercial entities that we've now put in our residential neighborhoods in the form of tourist rooming houses and short-term rentals and vacation rentals and VRBOs and Airbnbs, that's really what pushed a lot of this. And not doing what we needed to do for the last 7 years to get in front of this stuff has put us woefully behind. So we need to be able to handle this from a use versus the structure type and what's permitted as a use. So when we revisit those definitions, as Ben said, that's where we define this to put square pegs in square holes. Thank you.
Mr. Beining, before you go, can you say what you said again? You want to handle this as a use issue, not a dwelling issue?
Well, so in this case, this particular case here, you can't put 4 in the same well and septic. You're not going to get financing, traditional financing from a bank on it. When you say, I want to buy one of these, and they're like, well, where's your well and septic? Oh, I share it with these other. Oh, you mean you have a condo? No, we didn't zone it as a condo. That is going to be a problem. So financing on this is going to be very problematic. So that's why we have these zoning rules to prevent these problems. So when we ultimately talk about financing our homes and our dreams, it needs to fit the right spot, right? And the second photo down there, to me, it's use versus actual density and what the property type is. So sorry if I mix those two up kind of with both photos, but a lot of this when you show that photo to me, that's somebody who wants to run a business with 2 homes on it. And that's where you start thinking about your zoning classifications and those uses, right?
Sure. It does say on the sheet here, they were both lawfully placed and there happens to be 2 lawfully placed structures on that piece of property, 2 dwellings. I say, I'm never going to be one to tell people what they can and can't do other than don't hurt the environment and don't tick off your neighbors. And in this case, they own them. It's been said that you can rent a dwelling, so I think they're in luck. But that's just my opinion, not that of the committee. Is there anything else? Ms. Delaney?
A lot of my questions are just trying to rationalize where the history has brought us today. So my understanding is that part of the confusion is back in the 60s and prior to that, things happened, and then zoning came along and there appeared to be some random classification back 50, 60 years ago. I was thinking that we already had a zone district that covered high-density development, and that would be our RR2. So things that were former resorts or resorts that have gone condo, that is your higher density. And with the slight verbiage change that Jay had already proposed, things like unless otherwise approved, you could do things with a conditional use permit. I do think this group's got to make a decision of whether you segregate shoreland area. I think, at least my gut feel tells me that many of the municipalities don't want higher densities in the shoreland area. I could be wrong there, but do you choose to do something across the board, or do you segregate shoreland and then worry about definitions and clarifying what you've already spoken of for everything outside the shoreland? But for me, I don't think you need to create a new zone district. It already exists as RR2, but you need to clean up that definition to make sure it covers the myriad of things that are now going to be talked about.
Thank you. Would you just tighten up a little bit? Am I hearing you say you would like to have a qualification in there, whether it's shoreline or not? Is that fair?
That's fair. I think this group should decide, do you allow further either multifamily or multi-unit development in a shoreland? I think that's something that should be coming out of this group as a recommendation, yes or no, to break that apart from the bigger issue shown in some of these examples.
Marvelous. Thank you. Anybody else before Ben? He's gone a couple times.
I know.
He's passionate.
Yeah, he is.
I did have a lot to say. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I just want to clarify one thing. We're talking about the 2 units here. A lot of what's driving the tourist rooming house stuff too is the right to rent law. Okay, out of the state of Wisconsin, from what I understand, it allows someone to rent their second home. And I believe it was designed for, again, initially for people who maybe had a second home, the mortgage crisis, all this stuff, help people out to be able to rent out your second home so you're not going under your mortgage. Now, it does not state that you can rent your 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th home. And that's something too, when we're talking about 2 units on one lot, and they want to rent them out, currently that falls under the definition of a resort with Sawyer County. 2 or anything more than 1. So that's a kind of the fine line that the county is walking and everyone else is, that everyone's got the right in the state to rent out one place or their second home. But when you start talking about renting 2 on the same lot, that's not guaranteed by the right to rent law. And that's something where the local authorities come in. And I agree with Sarah that determining what we recommend goes forward on shoreland district property in particular, I think is very important with the number of dwellings and dwelling units and clearing up those definitions. So thank you for letting me clarify. Appreciate it.
Any other thoughts? Mr. Bando, this one was right up the road from your house, so
Yes.
only half a mile away.
Yep. May I jump back in?
Sure.
So back to Sarah's consideration of RR2. So as the current zoning ordinance is laid out, and maybe this has changed before my time, the only difference really between RR1 and RR2 is that the RR2 zone district allows for trailer camps and campgrounds. Other than that, as far as density requirements and the current layout of where multi-dwelling development requires a conditional use permit is shown in both the RR1 and the RR2. So I wouldn't necessarily agree that RR2 is supposed to be for the resorts, because that's not how it's currently laid out. Now, if you wanted to have it go there, that's definitely something to consider, but that's not how it currently reads, at least for me. And then there was, yeah, definitely the shoreland, non-shoreland. The other consideration, and it wasn't really talked about too much, is that 2-family dwelling, that duplex scenario. So I do kind of want to circle back to that. I mean, should we allow for duplexes? Should we allow for duplexes in shoreland? Should there be, again, the density requirements for a duplex? I mean, a duplex, from what I see, it's two dwelling units in one structure, right? Obviously, I think there should be density requirements to do that, but I don't know if I mean, do you want to prohibit them in the shoreline? You know, they currently are allowed within R1, RR1, RR2 as permitted uses as the two-family dwellings. So that's something to definitely think about. From there, you also have to then consider is, okay, I build a duplex and I want to rent both sides of the duplex. Is that a resort? I'm renting two units, but it's contained in one dwelling. So just other considerations to make as we work through some of this stuff.
And in my tenure, I think I had one request for a duplex in Shoreline in all those years, one. And that was a unique situation. It was more like a mother-in-law cabin. The mother-in-law was gonna live there too, and they wanted to give her own space, which is understandable. Yeah, I don't wanna reinvent the wheel for things that don't happen very often, but, yeah, that's one that I think we're gonna have to dwell down on is, duplexes.
Mr. Olson?
Go ahead, Mr.
Jim Stratland. You know, it's interesting, the duplex avenue, but zoning, if you put up a duplex, are we considering it two addresses? That's to me, then that becomes like two separate buildings in one that should be considered as two houses.
Yeah, for the 911 fire number, I'd have to talk to Brian DeVries, GIS technician. I guess it depends on what the owner would want. We would definitely require at least one, and they could call it 1123 Unit A and Unit B. But if they had, separate tenants, I mean, something like a suite number, a suite 1 and suite 2. So I'd have to look back in our fire number code or fire number ordinance and whether or not they would require two separate fire numbers. But I mean, they're all intents and purposes that, yeah, they are two separate units. They're just contained in one structure. Yeah, but that's where I go back to the density where, there's, at least in the city, which again, county zoning and the towns, you're not actively involved in the city, there's a bunch of duplexes going up. And those are probably going to start expanding out into the town of Bass Lake, town of Hayward, some of the more, urban areas of Sawyer County. Where, I mean, we should decide on, okay, if you want a duplex, is it allowed? Is it not allowed? Is it in a shoreland? Is it not a shoreland? And do you need to have additional density of the lot? If you want to do this duplex, do you need 20,000? Do you need the 40,000 for two? The R1 currently only needs another 5,000 square feet for each additional dwelling unit. And again, that's the only density standard that's shown in ordinance. I guess while we're on the subject of density, the other weird zone district where some of this stuff pops up, this is more of the advanced training that I was gonna do later, but commercial 1 is another one that we should definitely get some density aspects in, because right now, as a permitted use within the commercial zone district, talks about rooming and boarding houses. There's no definition of what a rooming and boarding house is. Also, as a permitted use in commercial is motels, but nothing ever shows up as far as density for those. If I want a motel, is it just the generic setbacks as a commercial zone district? Or because I have 20 unit motel, I need this much more land area? The rooming and boarding houses scare me because that almost sounds like, if we go back to the example of the 4 dots in the red box, if that was zoned commercial, those are rooming and boarding houses and they're a permitted use with no density standards.
Probably.
Right. That's a little fearful. That was more of something I was gonna lay into, meeting 3 or 4, but something to definitely circle on your notes as we come back to, I guess, some additional draft language. I guess from here, I would like to see, what the chair wants to see moving forward, what the other committee members, want to see moving forward. I mean, do we want to have, a yes, no type of agenda for votes in the future?
I think that's the next agenda item.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for today, we'll try to keep this one fairly short today, and I hope to never see meeting 4 if we can help it. I know a lot of the things that have been broached here by several different people have all had to do with the short-term rentals on lake properties, which seems to be where a lot of the conflicts are coming from. And I believe Ms. Rusk served on that committee, so I think it would be appropriate to have her explain every conversation you had in that committee the entire time.
Would like to rescind my nomination.
Go ahead, Laura. Do you want to just touch on it a little bit?
That is where most of the problems are, is shoreland. And, okay, as a for instance, this is how I first became involved in zoning, which you remember, I'm sure, you remember. But a property that was, at one time, it was a resort. It hadn't been a resort for many, many years. Then the family that owned it decided they wanted to run it as a resort again. So they came before the town board requesting that they should be able to open a resort. Well, it was a long and lengthy process and they were denied that. Because they could have went for a rezone. The tourist rooming house and conditional use applications directed toward that were not in place at that time. But, okay, so now the same place is requesting, they want to tear down 2 of the existing cabins and build 1 duplex in that same location. This is shoreland. They want to have for their personal use 1 side of the duplex, and then they want the other side rented out all the time. So this is shoreland, and I do think that's one of the most important determinations here is separating shoreland from other zone districts, that we pay special attention to what that type of scenario inflicts on the resource and the neighborhood in which it is placed. We have to look at the fact that it does change the complexions of neighborhoods. And granted, under state now, you're legal 100% to go ahead and rent out your second home, although that second homes does not really apply because many, many of these dwellings were purchased with the sole intent of running a business. It isn't their second home. Perhaps they'll stay in it one week out of the year, but the rest of the time it is an operational business. That is what it is. So I guess it's awfully important that whether it's eliminating multi-dwelling language or however we approach it, that we make that definition clear in those neighborhoods, specifically shoreland. And that wasn't the whole tourist rooming house thing, but it was brought up a lot.
Very good. Thank you. Steve, are you still there?
Yep. Hey, when we talk about, that square footage requirement, this is kind of maybe a localized problem for me in Draper and Sawyer County, but sometimes you'll look at a lot that says 20,000 square foot, and there isn't 2,000 square foot of that lot that's actually buildable. When you start talking about wetlands and how that relates to our impervious surfaces. So I know this is my wish list, so as long as I'm sitting here at a spot where I can kind of mention it, is when we start talking about that 20,000 square foot or whatever square foot minimum, I want it to be the buildable spot. If you got a spot that's one little high spot out of 10 acres, and that is kind of the woodsy areas that we live around in Draper, I kind of look at that as the one spot where it's a high ground, it tends to be a bedding area, it tends to be a nesting area, and it's surrounded by beautiful wildlife diversity areas. And if we're going to just top off that one spot, it really puts a lot of pressure on that other wetland area.
I would agree with you, and that is also in the development subdivision ordinance that requires 7,500 7,500 square feet of the 20,000, I think, have to be buildable. Is that right, Jay?
I have to go into subdivision, which I don't have up right now. I just have.
That's
the
all right.
zoning
There is,
ordinance.
a lot isn't supposed to be developed unless you actually have that much buildable area on the lot, but we know how that has changed over the years. A lot of things, there's a lot of nighttime surveys, I think. So I think, if I don't see anybody else's hand up here. And I would like to go around the room at the end of the meeting here. One thing I started doing when I got to be chairman of my town was I heard people say, oh, I went there and never got to say a darn thing. And I think people should be able to come to a meeting and voice their opinion. And so I want to make sure everybody has their chance if they wanted to talk. So we're looking at future agenda items now. Number 12 on the agenda. I can kind of start it off with what I wrote down. So things that we're looking at defining would be rooming boarding house, a two-family dwelling, a multifamily dwelling. What else did I miss?
I guess we should look at like dwelling and dwelling unit, just to make sure we're clear between those two also.
Okay. I'm assuming the state probably has definitions for most of these things.
Yeah, I mean, just we want to make sure we want to look over a lot of these definitions to make sure it's clear to us and therefore clear to everybody what we mean when we say dwelling or dwelling unit, because that can be kind of confusing too.
Okay. I think questions that could be for the next meeting would be, as Ms. Delaney broached, do we want to go with a holistic approach of the whole county or just shoreline or just non-shoreline, or you think trying to define or split those two? I think that should be an agenda item for next time then. Would you? Okay. I like to have jumping off points. That way we don't get bogged down in the weeds. Anybody think of anything else for agenda items for next time? Mr. Bassett?
I think shorelands in this county need special protection. I think that's an extremely important environmental advantage that Sawyer County has over a lot of other areas.
Absolutely.
I personally kind of think that more than, more than one dwelling on a allotted property on a lake shore is not very intelligent. I think it needs to be looked at very closely, but I think however we do what we're here to do for, we should give it special attention on the shoreline property to protect the lakes at all costs.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Kurtzwell.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to say I kind of like Ms. Zilmer's idea of being able to have a public comment after discussion, just in case that we could think about maybe having that if more people, intend to show up and have questions about what we're doing or anything like that. Also, I guess I'd like to send this to Jay too, and just have Jay maybe look at the idea of what would be the worst case scenario if we eliminated the term multi-dwelling development for the ordinance. So we could get some feedback from him to see if that's an option going forward too. And that's kind of more for him, to look at, but I'd like it if he could maybe provide us some information about that at their next meeting also.
That would be an excellent agenda item. Ms. Marks, are we good with everything?
Yes.
Yes.
Anything else for agenda items?
Yeah, I hope with that we take a look at this about the building above garages for rental units. We have a problem with that.
Excellent. Skip my mind and you are 150% correct.
Yeah.
Ms. Delaney?
Just as we go through and possibly clean up the definitions, can we also look at what is permitted by the conditional use process with each of those pertaining to zone districts? So I guess it's in each zone district, what is permitted by conditional use, and perhaps cleaning up the language as Jay has proposed for specific entities.
Excellent. Go ahead, Bob.
One more thing, I think we really have to concentrate on, what's gonna be presentable to the townships to whether either that they pass it or they disapprove it or whatever. I mean, it's gotta be something that's gonna be palatable for most people. Like you say, you aren't gonna please everybody, but, we have to try to hit the middle of the road someplace where something that can be adopted.
I agree.
And yes, I think that that's the beauty of this ad hoc committee now is that we have town representatives from all our different towns with some of these issues that have been going to the towns before. Now here we are to help assist the county with crafting something that'll pass the town. So that's the whole goal. So I love that. Thank you.
Go ahead, sure.
I would like to take a look at the density that is required for each lot and area.
Density,
The density for the development,
so
density requirements.
how big a lot? Is that where your lot
So
size?
it would be, you have an existing building on there. If you were to add another building, you would need so much of land to allow for another building to be put on there.
Okay, so, and right now, since it is one lot, one dwelling per lot in most of the verbiage, not all of it, you're saying we should look at if we were to go with multiple dwellings per lot, how much additional lot size you would need?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. As long as I'm clear, everybody kind of got that?
I know this is a bit redundant, but we also need to be looking at not only just if it's multi-dwelling, whether or not we use that verbiage, but what constitutes a resort? We need to be looking at and I think what constitutes resort versus just having two dwellings. Are you running a commercial operation if you're renting out two dwellings on your lot?
Laura? And if we have other agenda items, when the agenda is prepared, I did not read the ad hoc committee rules of the road, but I'm assuming if somebody has a great idea, that they would be able to contact either Jay or myself or Kathy and have that added as an agenda item, even if we did not discuss it here?
Yes is the short answer. I mean, the chair controls the agenda, so they should contact you, or if they contact Jay, you and Jay should be putting the agenda together.
All right.
To answer the question?
Yeah. Yep. So the answer is yes.
Okay. Yeah.
One clarification before we move on, Mr. Sutton, when you talked about density requirements for lots, are you talking about like what the current zone district standards have for density requirements? Or do you want kind of like a rendering of, if you're trying to fit another dwelling unit on this lot, this is what you would need for buildable area? I guess that's my clarification.
I was actually conferring to both.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Well, and if I don't hear any more of those, everybody get your calendars out. Mr. Kurtzwell?
Thank you, Dale. I guess, and I understand that everyone's very busy, especially Mr. Kozlowski, and this room is tied up for certain things. My personal opinion is I would not be adverse to meeting once every 2 weeks or something to that effect and getting this done, in 6 meetings in 2 or 3 months as opposed to over the course of 6 months. But that's just me. I thought I'd throw that idea out there and see what anyone else on the committee thought about it. So thank you.
I agree.
I concur, Ben.
Wow. How about snowbirds? Anybody going south for the rest of the winter? If you are, you better leave within the next 3 days because it's gonna be cold. Nobody's going south?
Would that, would that be work with Jay and Kathy too? And I don't know about, again, but, and obviously it's not giving him much time for him to prep stuff in between, but like I said, I think all of us feel like we're ready to get our teeth dug into this and start, making some suggestions and everything, so.
Okay, I can't even find my calendar. There we go. I do have a part-time job, but I can usually get around it. So if you're saying 2 weeks, that puts us at about the 30th of January-ish. It's Franklin D. Roosevelt Day.
Is that going to be an issue for you?
I don't think it is this
Okay.
year.
Are we talking about continuing with the same day of the week, Thursdays, or like the same time? Did we agree on this because it was the most
And see, I'm not
easiest? for
I'm not
everyone?
like set in stone saying we have to meet 2 weeks from today at this time and everything, but that's up for discussion. Yeah, I'm just saying generally like a 2-week time span would probably be more proficient for us as opposed to a once. a month
Well, it
time
keeps
span.
things fresh, number one. It keeps things fresh and it keeps them moving. Number two, if we agreed that this was good, I mean, maybe all of us won't be able to make every single meeting, or maybe we'll have to do it remotely if we can. But if we walk out of here going every 2 weeks on Thursday at 3:00 until this is done, that's what we've got. So when you go home and you look at your calendar and maybe you're saying, am I gonna go down to Rice Lake to Aldi's and go shopping on Thursday? No, I'm not, because I have a meeting that I have to attend.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of that would be a hindrance would be, I don't want to put too much pressure on Kathy getting like the minutes of this meeting out. And has everybody got email? You got emails for everybody?
No.
Just, I think Bob is the only one that doesn't have.
Okay.
Email.
But it shouldn't take post office long. I just don't want to be burdensome to you as far as getting stuff out, because if we're meeting every 2 weeks, I want to have stuff in my hand and give me a week to think about it. If, we could turn it over in a week or not.
Yeah.
That, yeah, I mean, for everything you have on here to create an agenda and have it out to the committee in a week, that's pretty burdensome.
I mean, we can talk, 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks. I know I don't need an agenda a week before. I know some people do. But, I'm just saying a quicker turnaround as opposed to a month cycle, I think would be beneficial. And I don't want to put burden on them. That's part of it
Yeah.
too, that,
I just want to have the action items listed so I can go look up definitions, see what, I'm not above plagiarism and stealing other people's work from other counties. I mean, let them hire the high dollar attorneys.
I could have a pre-agenda done in a week and then like a final agenda like 2-3 days before the meeting.
I think that works.
that worked for me.
Let's
That
let's
seems
try it
fair.
in a couple of weeks. Mr. Buchholz.
I just think 2 weeks is way too much for the zoning above and beyond what else they got to do. But if they think they can handle it, that's fine, as long as other stuff is not forgotten, not get done. And this ad hoc committee doesn't take priority over everything else.
No problem, Ron. That's why we got, 15 of us sitting here, right?
Yeah, I don't want them to have to do any of the background work. I just want and I guess if it. I'll
What if we
do it
went
if
3 weeks?
it gets onerous.
That's just what I was gonna say, compromise, let's go 3 weeks.
What if we look at the first week of February?
And especially for this first meeting, we give them a little more time. We have a huge agenda. And maybe once we start getting the flow and our agenda starts moving down, we can, it'll be a little easier. But I've got no problem with 3 weeks to start.
Right, and we don't have to address all of those items at the next meeting either. I mean, maybe one of those items that we put out is going to take us most of the time, but at least we'd get something resolved. And then if we're gonna do 3 weeks, that certainly works. The idea is just to keep it moving and to keep our minds fresh on what we're doing, not to make more work for Kathy.
So we're looking at February 6th right now. Just for ease for staff, because you're done at 4 o'clock, maybe instead of starting at 3, we could start at 2.
Is that better?
Amy, is the room available on February 6th at 2?
Is,
It is?
yep. Public safety is in the morning.
That's it.
So the room is available from 2 to 4.
Everybody liking that? February 6th, 2 PM?
I will not be available. I'm on a snowbird, but I go north.
Oh,
Sorry, I won't be here.
would a day before or after help that?
That's my vacation week to go snowmobiling up north.
Okay. Gotcha.
I can give you the Zoom link.
No internet.
That's the best place to be.
Have you heard of International Falls out in the woods?
Okay,
If I can, I definitely sure would.
noted. As has been brought up a couple of times, before we adjourn, would we like to have the same 3 minutes that were offered at the beginning of the meeting at the end of the meeting? Yeah?
I think so. You know how it is. You sit there and you heard things and you're like, yeah, but. So I think 3 minutes at the end would also be good.
I think so too.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think we can even start doing that today, even though it's not an agenda item. I think that's part of adjournment. So is there anybody that has anything? Ms. Zimmer?
Thank you. Maybe to jumpstart the work between now and 3 weeks from now. Well, I could even pull it together if staff doesn't have time, but there are definitions in state statute. And I think what our zoning ordinance was first modeled after deals with that. So for instance, when you see a permitted use in all 3 residential zone districts of 1 and 2 family, that meets the statutory definition of a dwelling. And multifamily is 3 or more. That's also covered in statutes, and maybe that just needs to be inserted where appropriate. Then with regard to looking at some of the big conflicts that this committee is going to be working on, some of it goes to recent zoning amendments. 1 dwelling unit per lot didn't exist until 2020. The zoning committee approved it. It wasn't something that was totally vetted. So some of this is just cleanup. Some of it, if you look back in history, how 1 dwelling unit per lot got in the zoning ordinance, it probably shouldn't have been there to begin with. And I believe too that maybe even with the definition of motel, it exists in the zoning ordinance and it may have a density. So things that can be jump-started by the committee so you have answers already for the next one would get you going faster. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Stacy, we opened it up to anybody if you wanted to say any words? Okay. With that, any other business? Any other business? Thank you all for your work, and I plan on seeing you on February 6th. With that, we are adjourned.
Thanks, Pat.